Hello everyone, this is Arjen Siegman and today I am interviewing Hans von Storch, climate scientist, former lead author of the IPCC, UN Climate Panel and professor at the University of Hamburg. Welcome, Hans.
Welcome, Arjen.
And the reason that we have this interview is that a publication came out about climate change, climate policy. It's called Climate of the Middle, Understanding Climate Change as a Common Challenge, in which Hans has written a chapter. If I read your article, that you're quite critical about the effects of some things that people propose, which you say, well, you give an example of recycling clothes, where you say, well, this is hardly any measurable effect. And that makes it maybe even worse, isn't it? So that there is
I mean,
a big group, some group that is very concerned, very vocal, and the things they come up with are actually even do not have a measurable effect.
Of course, the decision if climate change is a very important or even dominant issue for the political arena, that's a political decision. And society is free to choose. And I would not say that they must not pick climate change. If society wants that, that's okay. It's a legitimate choice. If it's wise, is a different thing. And if it would collide with certain ideas about intra-societal coherence, is also a different story. But I would expect, if people say climate change is the dominant issue, then they should go after efficient measures. And this, I would say, is not the case. Instead, people mix up together all kinds of environmental issues and declare them to be climate related. So the used clothing has nothing to do with climate. It may be a very good initiative to make sure that we are not producing shirts to be carried just one time or two times, and that's indeed a stupid misuse of resources. But if we don't do that, we are not limiting climate change in any significant way. I mean, so we have to speak about the quantities involved, and that is usually what is not the case. I mean, very often the topic of climate change is taken as the driving force to get one's own agenda high up in the attention arena. So, for instance, if people are concerned about this issue that clothing is not a sustainable way of, the present type of clothing is not a sustainable way and should not be done like that, which is a legitimate claim, request. But it is sold as climate change policy, which is not. And we have other cases such as that people want to have close down airports earlier in the evening so that there's less noise. This has also not a noteworthy climate effect. And but the fundamental problem maybe is that people want to contribute actively to this, to saving the climate, as they say, or saving the world. And this is a bit difficult to find out how this can be done. The overall problem goes with a number, namely something like 35 to 40 gigatons CO2 plus other greenhouse gases. And that we must get rid of that in a foreseeable future down to zero, the net emissions. And that we in Europe have as a whole something like, maybe it's different now, or a little less, 4 gigatons. Now you could say, oh, sorry, these people in Europe, they're asking for products which are generated cheaper elsewhere. that may be true, so let's double the emissions. Then we are at 8. This is far away from 35 to 40.
Yeah.
So even though it would be fine if we reduce emissions, but it would not solve the problem. And if we think about how many grams of CO2 would be saved or not emitted if we would follow this clothing initiative, then this would be a very small number. It would not really contribute. And so I'm saying we should think about these numbers and think about how can our activity in Europe lead to reductions of emissions, in particular everywhere in the world, not only here. And so our main task is not to reduce emissions, but to show how we can reduce emissions. And then, of course, to demonstrate that efficiently and trustworthily, then we have to reduce it here as well. But the main achievement is not the reduction, but it's the knowledge about how to do it. And that is what needs to be thought about.
So that's the link that you also make in your article about what you see as the way forward.
Yeah, that's what I think.
That we should work on technological breakthroughs.
Yeah, and that we personally, each of us can contribute to that. The efficiency still will not be very high, but it would at least have a chance if we come up, say, with a greenhouse gas-free ship propulsion, that if that is efficient, of course, we would not buy a ship for ourselves and have an extra good propulsion system on it. But we could, for instance, invest in that, in such technology. And then if that is economically viable, then indeed it would also be used elsewhere in the world. By the way, others would develop elsewhere in the world similar things, of course. I mean, it's not so that only Germans or Dutch people could develop that, but they could also do it. And that would have a chance to really make out of the small saving of CO2 emissions in Northern Europe, a large one in the globe. So that is the question we have to raise. How do we make our small contribution or a minuscule reduction to something big on the global market? So how do we transfer our kilotons to gigatons?
If you talk to climate scientists after their presentation, and you say, well, is this realistic, the 1.5 degree target? They say, no, we won't make it. But if you talk to physicists or engineers who are working on technologies, they're actually quite optimistic. They say, we just need more investments in these fundamental things because it's actually doable.
I would say climate science has done most of its work. Of course, we can improve it and we can fill this gap and that gap. Now we know climate change is real. We know it is to a large extent driven by our emissions into the atmosphere, namely greenhouse gases, not aerosols. This is only minor, but it's a matter of air quality, of course. And that we, to some extent, can steer the problem by steering the emissions. Clearly the strategy should be, let's reduce emissions as much as we can without compromising other goals we have. And what the other goals are is not a matter which climate scientists have to decide, but it's a public thing. And we also should think about reducing the vulnerability to events, climatic events, not only those who maybe have become stronger, but also those which are simply there. I mean, think of the disaster which has been came along with tropical cyclones. And as far as I know, the number of fatalities, say in Bangladesh, because of tropical storms has been reduced massively, also because of good investments by Dutch organizations how to advise people and have constructions that help people to survive such events. So to improve the adaptive level. I mean, these are the things we need to do. But how we do these better adaptive measures, how we reduce the emissions, this is no longer a matter you should ask climate scientists, but those people you have spoken to, or you just have referred to. And if they are too optimistic or not, I cannot say. But I would say let's try it out. It's a good chance, and I'm not sure how many percentages of development projects will be successful. Is it 2% or is it 10%? But usually I'm not independent of climate change. And so we should invest into that.
Great. Yeah, so you call them Apollo projects in your article.
Yeah.
And which is also saying, well, let's be inspired by having a common goal where people contribute to do something that's hard to achieve, but at least motivates everyone.
Yeah, but I mean, like Kennedy said to this, I mean, we will be on the moon in 10 years' time, not we. He said a human will be on the moon. And so that we say we will have CO2-free ship propulsion systems ready in, we should say the year 2030 or whatever, or 35. And that would be great if we achieve that. And then if I then have to give up 500 euros per month, if I can achieve it, and I feel it is so valuable, then I and my fellow middle class members should do so.
Great. Yeah, thanks a lot for this optimistic view, and I think also a realistic view on what we can do as countries for the rest of the world in an optimistic and way that creates some energy